Hey everybody, welcome back. As promised, I am going to begin describing the 21 judgments that we see in the book of Revelation, beginning today in this video with the first 4 judgments, which is the white, red, black, and pale horse. And I do believe all 4 of these judgments happen in the first half, the first 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation. So the first seal is seen in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 2. It says, "Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, 'Come and see.' And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer." So there are 2 main views of who this is on this white horse. And the first of those views is that this is Jesus. And those who hold this view point to chapter 19, where it says Jesus is riding in on a white horse, coming to destroy his enemies and set up the millennial kingdom. There are several problems with this view, though. First, this takes place during the tribulation, and Jesus does not ride forth as a victor until the end of the tribulation in chapter 19. Second, this rider holds a bow, whereas in chapter 19 we see Jesus described as coming with a sword from his mouth, which will strike down the nations. Third, the rider of this horse here in chapter 6 is given a crown, which is the Greek word Stephanos, which means a victor that triumphs in a contest or a game. Whereas the crown described as Jesus having and riding in on in chapter 19 is the Greek word diadem, which is the crown for royalty or the crown of one who is sovereign. Finally, Jesus is the one breaking the seals here, and he's still here in verse 3 to open the next set of seals. So I do not believe that this first rider of the white horse is Jesus. I do, however, believe that this first horse and rider with a bow represent the Antichrist and the false peace covenant that is to come on the earth. You see, as I explained in my previous videos, Satan tries to counterfeit everything that is God. Therefore, we see him doing the same thing here. To counterfeit the white horse that Jesus will ride on in at Armageddon, we see the Antichrist here riding in on a white horse. And God's bow, meaning the rainbow that was a sign of God's covenant with mankind not to flood the earth again, is here counterfeited by the Antichrist's bow, which is the false peace covenant with mankind. What this means is that before the horrific terrors of the tribulation break forth on the earth, the terrors that will ultimately culminate at the Battle of Armageddon, there will be a period of world peace, but it will be a false peace, a deceptive peace with which the Antichrist will lull the world into a false sense of peace and security. Do you not see that the world is literally poised for this very thing right now? We see that the world is just looking for someone to offer an end to the wars and the threat of war, the end of racism, the end of bigotry, the end of religious animosity. There is an anxious desire right now in the world for international and national peace, and Satan is going to use this longing to his advantage. The desire for peace will be used by the Antichrist, who is Satan's world ruler. He will convince the world that he can give them peace and security that they are so desperately seeking. Jesus warned of this false peace that would come near the end in response to the disciples asking Jesus for a sign of the coming and of the end of the age. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 24, verses 4 through 5, he says, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many." Many would come to claim that they are this Prince of Peace, and they're going to mislead many. And we've seen that play out through history. The final fulfillment of this, of course, will be the rise of the Antichrist. The writer here in this passage has a bow, but no arrows. He's given a crown of a victor, or a victory or a triumph. Both of these facts show that he is honored because he is conquering without bloodshed. He is not a real king, but he's receiving the winner's crown from the world for his victory in bringing this 7-year peace covenant. The world peace on earth that they're searching for. His conquest will not be by force initially, but by deceit. His triumph will be peace won by agreement, not conflict initially. Even as the world teeters on the edge of God's final judgment, the Antichrist will promise an age of peace, security, prosperity, and in response, the world will honor him and elevate him to a position of supreme leadership. In Daniel chapter 9, Daniel speaks of a prince who is to come, meaning that is still future, who will make a covenant with Israel and the many for 7 years. Peace promised in the Middle East. His peace and his promises, however, we know will be short-lived. Then the second seal is the red horse, bringing conflict on earth. I believe this is still happening in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. In Revelation 6, chapters 3 through 4, it says, "When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, 'Come see.' Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, that the people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword." So Jesus broke the second seal here, and the second living creature, our scripture says, "Come," summoning the second horse, but I actually believe a better translation is "go." He's not being summoned, but he's being sent forth. The horse immediately went out. It was red, the color of fire and blood here depicts war. God's judgment breaks forth, and the false peace of this Antichrist is shattered. Before he even declares himself to be God, at the midpoint, this is shattered. The whole 7-year tribulation, understand, is the wrath of God, and it is not going to be for the whole 3.5 years just la-di-da, this false peace, and only the second half of the tribulation be bad. That's not the case. So God's judgment breaks forth here, and the peace that the Antichrist has laid out for the people is shattered. John writes concerning the rider of the red horse, he said, "To him who sat on it was granted to take peace from the earth." This showing us that all that happens in this world is under God's sovereign control. God allows the false peace, and then he brings an end to that false peace by bringing war on earth. John says in verse 4 that the men kill one another, and considering the modern weaponry that we now possess, this does suggest a terrible destruction of life. John goes on to note that this rider was given a great sword. The word translated sword here is the Greek word actually for a short stabbing sword of a Roman soldier used in battle. So the fact that it's called a great sword is not an indication of its size, but of the extent of its killing. It will be worldwide. The false peace of the Antichrist will dissolve into war and revolt. He will play a major role in these things and in these wars as he seeks to preserve his power. He will be a skillful leader at war and also at promoting this false peace. When he breaks his covenant with Israel in the middle of the 7 years, he will set off a massive conflict at that point. War will continue as the Antichrist tries to crush his enemies through the rest of the tribulation. The end will only come, of course, when Jesus returns at Armageddon. Then the third seal, being the black horse here, is scarcity on earth. And I believe this is still in the first 3.5 years. Verses 5-6 says, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come and see. So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. So when the Lamb here breaks the third seal, John saw a black horse being sent forth. This black horse denotes famine. Famine is a natural consequence of worldwide war as food supplies are destroyed. So this is like a consequence of the previous horse. Jesus in Matthew 24 verse 7 predicts famine. John tells us that the rider in the black horse holds a pair of scales in his hand. This picture is given to us of the rationing that takes place due to the famine. And remember, these seraphim that are stationed around the throne of God, is likely that the voice here is of the Father here, and him speaking is a reminder that the famine is a direct judgment from God himself. The words spoken give us an example of the severity of this judgment. A quart of wheat is barely enough to sustain one person for one day. The price for that denarius, which is a Roman coin, is equivalent to a day's wages for a common worker or laborer. One day's salary, it's telling us, would provide you with enough wheat to feed one person for one day. If you had a family, you could purchase 3 quarts of barley, it's telling us, for that same amount, but barley is low in nutritional value, and more often it's used to feed livestock. God continues here with the warning not to waste the oil and the wine. Basic food staples were priceless luxuries at this point. Olive oil and wine were used in preparation of food and to purify water. They must be used sparingly at this point and carefully protected. This also denotes that the poor would suffer, but the rich would be fine, as they can still afford these luxuries of oil and wine. This famine will be none like the world has ever known. It is worldwide, and it will be devastating. And then finally, the fourth seal, the pale horse, is widespread death on the earth. And I believe, although this happens in the first half of the tribulation, I do believe it is approaching the middle point where literally all hell breaks loose. It says in verse 7-8, when he opened the fourth seal, I heard a voice of the 4th living creature saying, come and see. So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed him. And power was given to them over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. So when the Lamb here breaks the 4th seal, John sees a pale horse sent forth. The Greek word translated pale here is chloros, which means a sickly green, the color of the skin of a decomposing corpse. It symbolizes death, and we are told by John that the rider and on this horse, that its name is Death. This is fitting because death on a massive scale is the consequence of widespread worldwide war and famine. John tells us that death is followed by his companion Hades. Death claims the life of the physical body, while Hades claims the soul. Authority is given here, but it's not theirs. It is given to them by God to destroy 1/4 of the world's population. And let's put that in perspective here. At the current population of the world is over 8 billion people. That would mean that in this one judgment, over 2 billion people will be killed. That is more than the population of North and South America combined. It's not even close. And there are at least 21 judgments possibly 28 if the seven thunders that John was told to seal up and not write, that we saw in Revelation chapter 10 verses 1 through 7, if those are also judgments. This destruction of the fourth of the population of the world would be done by, it says, sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. The sword, of course, depicts war, and the famine were already seen having come in the second and third seals. The fourth seal expands these conditions and adds pestilence, which may refer primarily to diseases and epidemics, which include or that break out commonly after war and famine, bring death and these decomposing bodies and all of these things. A lot of disease comes out of that, but it's also broad enough that it could include here natural disasters and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, floods and fires. With the lack of food to from the lack of food to the ravages of war and famine and wild beasts, the wild beasts are gonna go crazy because of all this famine and the lack of food. They're gonna be starving. So that is probably what's gonna drive the beasts to go and kill man, because they're gonna be searching for food. We cannot begin to imagine the destruction, the death, and the terror that those on earth will face in these first four seal judgments when they're broken and the horseman of the apocalypse is released.